It's a real pleasure for me to welcome everyone in the new discussion as part of the Year of the Soul of the City, which is organized together with the Living Cities Research Group and Eco-Civilization. The topic today is storytelling, a civic repair, narrative healing, and reconnection. And while I was getting ready for this discussion, I just realized how much a safe space for this kind of discussions is missing in the modern society. But before we move forward, let me just bring you on board very quickly on also the concept of eco-civilization movement, which is in a forum of a disruptive global cluster of people who care. A safe space for engagement, collaboration, innovation, and emerging foundation for the future civilization. Something very important happened this year. And China, one of the biggest economies in the world, announced their transition from industrial to ecological civilization. They passed a very important code in March this year, which is called Ecological Civilization Code, requesting all their stakeholders to do whatever they can to move towards this code and readjust all their actions to fit into this ecological civilizational code, which is an incredible move and gives all the ideas around ecological civilization an additional credibility and push. So why does the soul of the city topic matters to the eco-civilization? In my humble opinion, there are a couple of really good reasons. Cities are a living field of relationships, very dynamic and very condensed. And in the future, or let's say in ecological civilization, relationships are the key driver for any kind of value creation and progress. The quality of relationships and quantity of relationships. The second is that the basic living organism in our societies are cities and villages. So we consider them as communities, and that's where humanity has found its space to deliver its mission and try to find its sense on this planet Earth. Of course, we see another important movement that the cities and villages are now slowly acknowledging that it's time to start thinking about stewardship before leadership. And stewardship of relationships is something we see in small communities now in emerging and intensifying. And last but not least, really the communities are the space of communion. And that's where the future has its core, the future has its roots. And that's why it's worth discussing as much as possible, also when we discuss civilizational paradigms. Just briefly, it is important to acknowledge and simply be aware that a modern human, and cities and all communities included, we are intertwined in three different worlds with three different sets of rules. One is the natural ecosystem of planet Earth. The other one is human-based communities, which I call Nature 2. And the third one, which I call Nature 3, which is artificially generated due to the technology. And it has, again, its own rules and its all ways of interaction. So now in the middle here are humans. And without real acknowledgement of this different three dynamics, it's hard to really responsibly take over a stewardship role in the future of the world. And within eco-civilization, we try to see new structures within which we engage on the level of communities. This is still just a theoretical model, but I'm very optimistic, and especially due to the latest developments, that we will see some sort of shift in understanding how societies should organize themselves. And this might be just a good provocation or one of the solutions of the future. And today we are focusing with the Soul of the City project on the society, communities, and collaboration within those societies. Last but not least, in this year, we are running two different topics. The Year of the Soul of the City, which we are doing together with Marina, and the network of Living Cities, Living City Research Ecosystem. And the Year of AI Challenge, which again we're doing together with three organizations, trying to bring, and Marina is part of it again, trying to bring this important topic closer to day-to-day understanding of its implications, potentials, but also challenges. We just launched a book, Mental Health, which we were running this topic last year, and in June 24th, we are launching another book, which is called Leadership Challenged, From Paradox to New Horizons. So you're all welcome to come and join us again on June 24th. So that's from my side, Marina, just to open up the session. And now I'm passing word back to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for setting the frame and the foundation for today's conversation. Living Cities Action Research Ecosystem is a global research hub which connects leaders committed to transforming cities into living ecosystems which thrive in harmony with nature. And healing trauma, not only through reconnection with the past and healing the past wounds, but also through reimagining the future there, where these wounds can become not only healed, but to become the source of new energy and new creative activities. That's the one of the focuses of our research. And today's conversation, which is dedicated to storytelling as civic repair, is mostly focused on using story not only as the art or communication or entertainment, but mostly as the method of healing, reconnection, and civic transformation. And we look at it as the form of civic infrastructure, the way how communities can remember, grieve, restore trust, reclaim their identity, and, as I mentioned, reimagine new regenerative futures. So what we want to discuss today is how communities can move from inherited stories of victimhood, denial, shame, revenge, separation towards the stories that make space, the space for dignity, accountability, resilience, reconciliation, renewal. And we are deeply concerned that storytelling may help, and we are working to bring this knowledge and these ideas on how storytelling can restore this civic identity and bring to the table marginalized voices, indigenous wisdom, migrant memory, intergenerational testimony, artistic expression, place-based knowledge, and how we can heal wounds which are connected with displacement, colonizing wars, different natural disasters, and many other objective historical situations that bring not only individual or even collective trauma, but also territorial geotrauma, which holds memory, holds pain. And we strongly believe and hope that today we will be able to describe and first of all discuss the practices of healing process of regeneration and bringing new energy of co-creation, healing, and trust to our modern communities. So let me introduce our speakers. And so I would follow the sequence of our presentation. So let me start with Professor Dr. Suada Sulimanovic, professor at the Faculty of Civil Engineering in University of Sarajevo, the country chair of Civilization in Bosnia and Herzegovina. It's really important that she is going to bring perspective as an engineer, as an educator, and sustainability practitioner, shaped by the post-Yugoslav experience. And I hope that Violeta also maybe share some of her ideas briefly now, and reflecting on how storytelling, dialogue, and shared action can help rebuild trust, belonging, community resilience, and across inherited divisions. So also, I don't think that Violeta needs introduction, but let me do so. So Violeta Bulc is a founder of the Global Civilization Movement, former European Commissioner and Deputy Prime Minister of Slovenia. And also she can share some of her reflections on the role of storytelling in collective trauma healing in European countries. And the next speaker is Jim Brule, transformational storyteller, death doula, a teacher and founder of transformational storytelling, with their ideas and presentations and her invaluable experience on the stories of the city and how collective narrative practices and the framework of narrative healing can help us reimagine our futures. So sharing the grassroots model of uncovering community narratives and strengths and resilience and healing is a very valuable and very much looking forward at contribution today. And the last but not least, Dave Smith, who is joining us from Aotearoa, New Zealand, in the middle of his night. So thank you so much for your contribution and for your willingness to be with us in the middle of your night. And it's a very interesting conversation with him, which we are very looking forward, that will bring us insights from of the community resilience post-earthquake healing experience. So it's not only some technocratic or maybe human caused problems, but also how the community can recover from the natural disasters. And also he is an author of absolutely fantastic graphic stories and tales for children, which also bring place-based wisdom and approaches to healing and collective imagination in the reparative practices in local communities. So our conversation promises to be very rich. We will have an hour and a half and maybe a little bit more. So I hope that it will also be intense. And we also have Omar as our co-speaker. So Omar, we will be glad to hear maybe some your ideas after all speakers shared their vision and idea and contributions. So Violeta, back to you, and then Suada.
Thank you. Thank you, Marina. And since Suada and I both are invited to share post-Yugoslavia story, I just wanted to shape first, frame the time and space within which these stories are emerging. We come from a very turbulent region where we had incredible history of fights and change of kingdoms and kings and emperors and all kinds of tribes that actually move through our territory. This is just a very short history of how the Yugoslavia came about. And in such a short period of time, so many different really rulers have ruled in this area. But above all, Social Federal Republic of Yugoslavia was a very unique story on its own. Why? Because it consisted of 6 republics, 6 nations, 5 languages, 2 analphabets, 3 major religions. I mean, you can imagine the diversity that was created, and above all, we peacefully coexisted for many decades. We shared flag, anthem, international affairs, military, federal budget, but we had a very independent republics within Yugoslavia. Each republic had its own national institution, school system, its own police, jurisdiction, local self-governments, media, press, and everything that is actually more related to independent states than just a republic. And that was probably the reason why we could peacefully coexist for so long. Just out of curiosity, if you take a sports point of view of the story, we had 87 Olympic medals, 30 World Championship medals. So sport was very big, and that kind of connected us and united us in many ways. To further explain the importance of this space is that Yugoslavia was never part of either East or West bloc. Even more, the President Tito and Yugoslavia were one of the key initiators of an incredibly important global movement that existed in the period of a Cold War, which was called non-aligned movement. And hardly anybody knows that that movement consisted of 120 member countries and 17 observing countries. So some sort of very dynamic political playground was created. And it had very noble ideas. As you can see, the initial countries who signed the beginning, the first contracts were Yugoslavia, were India, was Egypt, was Ghana, and Indonesia. And then the rest of the country followed. Again, it was a melting pot of everything, but with a very clear joint mission to keep peace on this planet Earth alive and to be some sort of a balancing power in between West and East, which existed politically at that time as well. Today, we see the continuation of this unaligned movement in a form of a global South or BRICS or similar organizations who kind of continue philosophy of a non-aligned movement. But there is another thing that happened in Yugoslavia that hardly anybody talks about. It was a huge economic and social experiment called so-called self-management system. So this was probably the most original contribution to political economical thought of the 20th century. And the central idea, that you get a sense of the dynamic that was happening in this very young state, who actually was completely ruined during Second World War, but inspired by the collaboration and building on the differences. The central idea was that those who work in an enterprise should participate in the decision making about what's happening with this enterprise. So there was a formal, even law passed on that regard. And so the factories didn't belong neither to private owners, not to the state, but actually to the people who engaged and shared their knowledge and labor to deliver value creation. So it was so-called social property. So that's important to understand because that gave a huge sort of characteristics to the country. But country fell apart. And today we have as many stories as storytellers. Depends on the point of view, depends on the angle, depends on the historical background. The fact is that, like for civilizations, the same applies to states. It's always a consequence of internal turmoils. But like all civilizations and all other countries that no longer exist, it's always helped a little bit from the outside as well. So the story about this breakup is very much evolved out of the tensions that were created in one side from socialist partisans mentality, on the other side nationalistic and royalists, fascists and Nazis, collaborators, religious interests, and we could go on and on and on. But there were also external interests. The country was way too strong. They had too much political influence, too independent. And it started to consider extension. So it started to consider to go beyond these initial six republics and bring other countries in the region on board as well. So becoming too strong as a global influencer, and that did not go well with some other global powers who had a different view of, especially European continent. A good reflection, or actually the element that describes this tension that happened internationally as well is just the story of our president, former President Tito, who, until he was alive, kept Yugoslavia together. For example, on his funeral attracted the largest number of heads of states in the history of modern world and royal families. However, a few years later, he was proclaimed as dictator and criminal. So that just tells you how quickly the story can change, how quickly you can reshape the point of view based on the interest, based on current mindset or political willingness. So just quickly, my story. I was born and lived in Yugoslavia from 64 and 89. So left Yugoslavia and moved to California while it was still Yugoslavia, and returned back in 1994 to an independent Slovenia. And what I would like to say, and then I will invite Suada to share her point of view and her story, which is for sure a very dramatic one. I really enjoyed my youth. Free education, free public health, scholarships, jobs, flats, international travels, everything was taken by the by. We didn't even think about it. And only when I moved to US, I realized what a rich and affordable life I had. So every child was really well taken care of. Everyone learned how to swim, ride a bike, ski, was taken to the seaside for summer holidays. Extracurriculums were all provided for by the system. It was safe, inclusive, based on solidarity and collaboration. But not everybody was happy about it. And that started when people hit the labor market and started to engage in economical sense. I got the best out of Yugoslavia I could. And I still feel like at home, wherever I go in the former republics of Yugoslavia. So that's really quickly my story. And now I would like to pass the story to Suada and then complete my part with some questions that I hope will continue and engage our future discussions. Suada, the word is yours.
Okay, I'm here. I want to thank you for having me today, and thank you, Violetta, for invitation today. Before I begin, please bear with me, as English is not my first language, and I'll do my best, and I'm sure we will understand each other just fine. Also, I want to apologize in advance, as I will need to leave a bit earlier due a prior commitment. However, I'm delighted to have this opportunity to contribute to this important discussion today. I wrote down my speech because I want to be brief without forgetting everything I want to say, so don't mind me reading a little. As you said, my name is Suada Sulejmanovic, and I'm professor at the Faculty of Civil Engineering, University of Sarajevo. Today, I would like to share with you how my teaching, research, and professional work have reconnected me with people, places, and cities across the region, and how through cooperation, dialogue, and shared purpose, they also become part of my own journey of healing after the trauma of war and displacement. Violetta said a lot of things that I wouldn't even know how to explain. Thank you, Violetta. But all of it is true. You addressed storytelling's role in healing collective trauma in Yugoslavia and the post-Yugoslavia region. I would like to continue from that perspective. For me, this question is not only historical or political, it is deeply, deeply personal. When I first read the topic of today's conversation and the question, who gets to tell the story of the city, I found myself asking a different question. Which story do I belong to? Because I was born in Serbia, then one of the republics of former Yugoslavia. I grew up in southeastern Bosnia and Herzegovina, and for almost 35 years I have lived in Sarajevo, the heart of Bosnia and Herzegovina. For many people, Yugoslavia is remembered less as a political entity and more as a part of their personal story. It brings back memories of childhood, family, friendships, and a time when everyday life seemed connected by a shared sense of community. While the country has disappeared from the map, it remains alive in the memories of those who experienced it. Throughout my life, states, borders, and political systems have shifted. Even more telling, the stories we share about ourselves and others have transformed. My childhood was happy and carefree. But just after my 18th birthday, the arrival of war irrevocably changed everything. In the years that followed, I experienced displacement twice and witnessed how a place you know, the people you know, and the life you know can become something entirely different overnight. In such moments, you do not lose only your home. You lose a sense of belonging. You lose part of your identity. You lose the story that once helped you understand where you fit in the world. These experiences taught me that identity is not shaped only by geography or political borders. It is also shaped by the stories we tell, the stories we inherit, and the stories others tell about us. So perhaps the real question is not what changes when borders move, but what changes within us. What shapes us more, borders or the narratives we create around them? When we speak about territorial trauma, we often think of damaged infrastructure, destroyed buildings, or altered borders. But some of the deepest wounds remain invisible, living in relationships, memories, and inherited narratives. During the war, people who shared daily life became strangers. Neighbors, friends, and classmates suddenly found themselves divided by new identities and new stories. Places were separated, and the stories people used to understand each other were divided too. Living in Bosnia and Herzegovina, the country that continues to carry the consequences of war and fragmentation, has shown me how powerful stories can be. They can deepen divisions, but they can also help heal them. Healing often begins when people start talking again, when they listen to one another and share memories, fears, losses, and hopes. But trust is not rebuilt overnight. It grows through dialogue, cooperation, and shared experiences. When people work together toward a common goal, they begin to rebuild connections and create new relationships. These shared experiences often become the foundation for new stories, stories that bring people closer together rather than further apart. I know this from personal experience. Years after the war, I work and collaborate with people who once found themselves on opposite sides. What brought us together was not politics. but conversation, cooperation, mutual respect, and the recognition of our shared humanity. That is why I believe storytelling is not merely a way of preserving memory. It is also a tool for civic repair. Stories create space for empathy, understanding, and reconnection. They help us see the human being behind an identity and the neighbor behind a vision. Today, Sarajevo is my home, not the city where I was born, but the place where I rebuilt my life, relationships, and sense of belonging. This experience taught me that belonging is not defined only by where we come from, but also by what we build together. So, who gets to tell the story of the city? We all do. Those who were born there, those who arrived later, those who left and returned, those who experienced loss, and those who found a way to begin again. And no single story is enough. But together, our stories create a fuller, more truthful, and more human picture of who we are. And perhaps that is where healing truly begins. Not when we forget what divided us, but when we find the courage to listen to one another, work together, and create new stories. Stories that honor the past, acknowledge pain, and help build a shared future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Suada. I could feel your emotions at the back, your memories at the back. And this is exactly what we need to do, build new stories that are bigger than ourselves. And that just complements really well the closing remarks that I wanted to make about story of Yugoslavia, which is just a good example. So I love my country, Slovenia. It's a small, beautiful, safe, really great culture and fantastic language background that really helps us to stay unique in this constellation of nations and countries. And I love EU. I love the project of 27 European countries working together to keep the peace within the EU territory and make sure that we could prosper together. But it feels strange, really, not to be able to talk about Yugoslavia at all and build on these experiences that we had that can be so educational for so many others. Because if I'm very honest, I see we're repeating the same mistakes, not trying to really learn from the history. And my big question here is, who gets to tell the story of the shared home that no longer exists? And I'm sure this is not only about Yugoslavia. There are many shared homes that no longer exist. And there is no doubt that Yugoslavia was an inspiring story, a story larger than ethnicity alone, a story of anti-fascism and Nazism resistance, social solidarity, modernization, mobility, and coexistence. And cities like Belgrade, Sarajevo, Ljubljana, Zagreb, and Skopje became places where incredible cultural diversity emerged. However, it broke down, and this is what I'd like to put a special emphasis on. As Suda said, on a baseline, it appears that many stories compete for its own narrative.
Yes.
And about belonging, loss, identity, memory. And this continue to shape cities and societies. And I just realized while I was, going back in my memories, that many of these escalated conflicts are based on genuine wounds hidden in the corridors of history, something that has not been spoken about, something that did not have a space where it could be reconciled and could be used as a building mechanism for a more open, inclusive and society or city with a higher level of awareness. Somehow, nobody's playing that role. So I would say as many stories as storytellers. And for me, history is a big teacher. Here are a few questions, and I finished then with my intervention, that kind of emerged while I was getting ready for this session. Because today, I got to say that many people today simultaneously hold contradictions within themselves. When you talk to people who belong to who were born and raised in old Yugoslavia, many of them would reject formal state politically, yet they feel nostalgic for aspects of their life within that community. Especially solidarity, social frameworks, as Suada mentioned, this community sense of belonging and brotherhood and sisterhood that we had. So can a society create enough civic trust to allow multiple memories to exist without threatening each other? Or can cities become places where different memories can be spoken without immediately turning into a weapon of dispute, as we saw in former Yugoslavia, especially in Bosnia, which was the turmoil of the conflict? And how to create conditions where diverse narratives can meet without collapsing into denial or hostility. The vision of Suada that Suada shared. Are we missing? What are we missing? Can a society remember a shared life without needing to restore the state that once contained it? Which is especially relevant for the youth, our children. They're listening to these stories. And what do they make out of them? They don't know how to place them, where to place them. Maybe there is a room for a new language, for a new function in the society, for just paying attention to that. So I can only hope that this topic will continue to emerge as a topic of a discussion, because it's extremely important. And I'm very grateful I was able to go back, because as I said at the beginning, there is not many opportunities to openly speak about former country, Yugoslavia. And it has so much to tell to a global community, hopefully not to repeat mistakes we've done. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, you, Violeta, and you, Suada. And as we were preparing to this conversation, I mentioned with all of you that this topic is deeply important for me personally, because I was born and raised in Soviet Union, the country that also does not exist anymore. And I think that former Soviet republics have to learn a lot from former Yugoslavian countries. And there is a very long and difficult path ahead of all our republics, former republics, and now sovereign countries, on how to coexist with each other, because we can move borders, but we cannot move land. We still continue to be neighbors, and we still have to find a way of coexisting peacefully with each other. So yeah, that's a deeply personal story for me, and thank you so much for sharing your experience in this, because so strange that human societies continue repeating the same problem in different contexts and different stories, time frames and regions. So yeah, again, thank you so much. And I would like to invite Jim to this conversation, because we precisely discussed with him his practical approach, his structured collective practice on how to uncover community narratives and how to bring these different voices and healing and reconciliation to the wounded communities, to the wounded places and wounded societies. So Jim, please, would you please share maybe briefly your background,
Sure.
your work, and what might be done, what might be learned?
Thank you. And thank you for both of you for a wonderful and touching opening to this important work. So I'm a storyteller. I'm a professional storyteller. I'm very much involved with using storytelling to affect change, whether that's personal healing and growth or at a community level. And I'm very much involved in working with people from different cultures. So my stories are not limited to those I grew up with, but those I've been fortunate enough to encounter in this world since then. So I do have a presentation, but I'll be talking through it. I won't be just reading the slides. So let me start that off here. There we are. And so we've done that slide. I'd like to start by acknowledging, with great respect, the Onondaga Nation, which you see in green here. They're the firekeepers of the Haudenosaunee, which is that larger area, the indigenous peoples on whose unceded lands I now reside. The Onondaga Nation is still governed by its traditional government, making it the oldest continuous democratic government on Turtle Island. And because it's resisted all attempts by the United States to change it into a tribal elective system, the Onondaga Nation continues to maintain its entire sovereignty. It's a rather unique condition here in this area. I'm going to start with a very short story and then tell you about this practical method of using storytelling to help heal and communities who've been affected by trauma, again, whether it's been political or social or environmental. It's all the same in one sense. And I'm going to look at two case studies. I'm going to look at a case study of how this was applied in Australia and how we're attempting to apply it here where I live. And so hopefully that'll give you some ideas of how this might be useful to you. There's more slides here than I usually like, and that's because I do outline the steps to this, and I want to make that available. So we'll have that for you as well. So the first thing is the story, and this is a story that is often told as a joke, but it has come to me that is very, very deep wisdom in this little story. And most cultures have a wise fool in their compendium of characters. They might be Nasrudin, they might be Yoha, they might be the people of Chelm. But in this story, there was a man who was awakened in the middle of the night by a tremendous clamor. He was deeply asleep. He didn't know what was going on, but he heard people shouting and alarms ringing, and he jumped out of bed and he realized that the library in their small community was on fire. And so everyone jumped out of bed, ran to the well, got their buckets, and raced over to the library and started throwing water on it to try and put it out. And this fellow turned to his neighbor who's standing next to him with his bucket of water, and he says, "Thank God that the library is on fire." And he looked at him and he said, "What are you talking about? It's our library." And the man said, "Well, but it's the middle of the night. If it wasn't on fire, we wouldn't be able to see what we were doing." It sounds like a silly story, but I think by the time we finish, you might find some wisdom there. So anyway, so I'm going to be talking about collective narrative practice. That's a formal approach. I've adapted it myself. And it comes from the Dulwich Center, which is in Australia. They've been doing this for certainly more than 20 years. And it's a technique that's been used with communities that have undergone some kind of collective trauma, a variety of ways. The it grew out of the work on individual therapy called narrative therapy, but it's been specifically adapted to work with communities in an important way. The main philosophy behind this approach is that we're not looking at individuals anymore. We're looking at communities who have shared trauma with an explicit purpose, and that is to move from victimhood to resilience, to tell stories that emphasize the strengths and the flexibility that communities have rather than their trauma, labeling them as victims. That doesn't mean we ignore those stories, but we tell them in a new frame. And the key concept that they like to say is the community is not the problem is the problem. So it's not the community's fault that they're faced with this, but there's been some kind of force that has brought this trauma to them, and that's the thing that needs to be addressed. So let's have a quick look at this one effort that went on early days in this project in Australia. It was hosted by the Dulwich Center. This was really their initial work with it, which operates on Kaurna land. And they worked with multiple, what they call Aboriginal communities in Queensland and Kamkooran. Now, what you need to know about these particular communities is that the median age in those communities was very, very low. It was only 24. You think about communities where most of the people are that young, it tells you there's been a loss of elders for that to happen. Even in that region, it's still 13, 14 years younger than the median age. So that was part of the circumstances under which they found themselves. And that was in part due to the legacy of the stolen generations, what they call the stolen generations, the federal effort to do away with Indigenous life. But the problems they were facing were what they ended up calling lateral violence. And this might resonate with some of you. And there were 4 dimensions to this. One was that they were engaged in what they called dangerous talk, gossip and rumor mongering. And this was resulted from people not having a shared history, people trying to figure out what they were going to do and fearing their neighbors who they saw as threats to them. So it led to isolation of individuals in small communities. It led to protracted feuds between families and a lot of physical violence. There was also a huge problem with the questioning of their individuals' Aboriginal status. You might be too light colored, you might be too dark colored, but now all of a sudden the government had said you're Aborigines, and so people had to figure out where did they fit in that, and in order to protect themselves, they naturally would say, well, I am and you're not. So this was another fuel to this fire. There was also, as I mentioned, a lot of physical violence. There was a lot of, also it happens, a lot of suicide, a lot of depression and suicide. So you can start to imagine the community that this is describing. And of course, because there hadn't been stories told before, now the stories that were being told were only of this terrible situation, and that was being passed down to the kids. So they didn't have a story of strength, they had a story of pain and victimhood, and that's what was being passed along. And it was tearing the communities apart. So the Dulwich Center come in, and I'll show you what they did, but to set your context, what they did is they say, let's pretend that this lateral violence is a character in a story. It's not you, it's not me, it's not you're doing this or I'm doing this. It's an outside force that is attacking us in some way or besieging us in some way. Now, if that's all you did, it would not be a productive thing. So what they next did is they took some of the elders, because there were still elders in these communities, and they had them personify that lateral violence character and enter into dialogue with people in the communities, so that people could express their anger, their pain, and these elders who were very well trained would then enter into dialogue with them and try and move towards some kind of understanding of what was going on. It's an unusual approach, but when you've learned how to tell stories and how to inhabit stories, this becomes not a difficult thing to do, and it leads to some really wonderful outcomes. And what were those outcomes? So after this took a couple years, but after this time, these are the outcomes they could measure. One is they had a shift in the way that people talked about themselves and as being resilient, not being victims. This entered into their everyday language, which is huge. They collectively, as small communities, just rejected lateral violence. They said, we're not, this is somebody else's agenda. This is not our agenda. We're not going to do this. They created a library of what they called collective documents, but they weren't just documents. There were oral stories, there were written stories and books, there were songs, there were poems, there was artwork, and they collected all these things and made them available to everyone so that they could come and interact with them and start to have a tangible aspect to their history. I mentioned there were problems with depression and suicide. They went and educated the providers of mental health, who were generally from the outside, from the federal government, and helped them understand their cultures and their way of doing things. And it improved the delivery of support in those institutions. And finally, and this is the most exciting thing for me, is that this was successful enough that they started telling other communities about what they had done. And I mentioned there are two communities. One was in the south, one was in the north. They got in touch with each other and they started to feed back and forth what was working for them and what strengths they had discovered. So it's something that once it takes hold, it can really have a wide-ranging impact. So how do you do this? Sounds good. Everybody says I've got the solution, but how do you actually do it? Well, the foundational exercise that they have is something they call the Tree of Life, and I'll show you that in a moment. It's an exercise that starts being done by just two people, really one person and then two people, but it's done in the context of a community. So you've got a whole room of people doing this, and they end up interacting more and more together. What we're using this particular technique to do is to build stories that can be interwoven. So my story gets woven with yours, it's woven with another's. One of the challenges, and it's been a challenge for me here, is that outsiders are never the owners of the stories. The leaders are always insiders. This is not someone coming from outside to fix what's going on. It's outsiders who have a brief interaction with the community to teach them these techniques, and then they run with them. And they can serve as consultants from time to time, but this has to be seen as fully owned by the communities one's working with. Otherwise, it's just another external imposition of value. So how does the Tree of Life works? Well, it almost sounds too simple, but here's what you do. You know those big Post-it notes that are really easel-sized? Everybody gets a Post-it note of that, and they draw this skeleton of a tree on it, and then they start to label it. And there's 5 labels that they give it. The first is, alongside the roots down there, they'll write, what's my history? Where do I come from? What do I know about my past? Those are my roots. The next is, what is my daily life like? What do I do? These aren't long stories, but these are just points so that people can say, here's, I'm a shepherd. I take care of the goats. It's my job to do that. What does my day look like? And then it moves up to skills, abilities, and values. So again, notice we haven't talked about trauma at all yet. All right. Who am I? What am I good at? What values do I hold? What are my abilities? Then we move to the branches, which is, what are my hopes? What do I dream? What do I wish for? Again, focusing on the future, not in how do I get out of this problem, but what am I being drawn towards? And lastly, oh no, there's one more after this. The leaves are significant people in my life, the elders, my parents, my children, whoever's important to me that is a part of my life. They might be ancestors who are no longer living. They might be a dear neighbor of mine, whoever's significant. And the last part is the fruits, which is, what gifts have others given me? So I invite you to just recognize we're not talking about trauma here at all. All right. It's not that it won't be talked about, but that's not the product of what's generated here. It's, our values, our strengths, all these sorts of things. So once you've got that, what do? Well, you've got your tree and you're paired with a listener, and you tell the listener what's on that tree. And you'll elaborate some of those things. You got to tell you about my neighbor Joe. They're an amazing person. Or somebody gave me this gift of hope that really has just stayed with me. You tell that to your listener, and the listener listens. And as we've been said before, they don't preach, they listen. And when they're done listening, they try and repeat it back to them, or the important things that they've learned from what they've seen. Because and that goes back and forth until the listener gets it right enough. Because what's going to happen is the listener is going to be the one to share your stories with the rest of the group. And that's critical, because it starts to build this interaction and this deep listening within the group. And after that's done, you put your stick-it note up on the wall. Well, if you've got 20 people in the room, pretty soon you've got a forest of these things around, and they're not all the same by any stretch, because we're all different people. So once you've built that forest, you say, well, now, if this forest was to encounter a storm, what would its best strengths be? What would it best be positioned to weather? And all of a sudden, we're not thinking about what I can manage, it's what we can manage. And if this kind of problem comes along, well, I can turn to this tree over here who's got some extra skills. You start to build this sense of a community of resources that says, what is it that we can actually encounter and weather? Then what happens is what I mentioned before. This starts to get written down. There might be certificates. Some people are really motivated by certificates, so you give them a certificate for having completed this. Kids do artwork. There's been songs that have been written that start to make their way into the community. So you try and make that something that a little more accessible to people who weren't in the room by making it public. So here we're putting them in libraries, we're putting, wherever people can encounter these things, and then ultimately inviting other communities to share. So that's the method. Now I'd like to quickly tell you a little bit about what's going on here, my early days project, and some of the challenges we're facing, and then a couple more thoughts, and I'll open up to questions. Syracuse, New York is a typical smaller sized city in the United States. It's one that was heavily dependent on manufacturing. When that left, the city started to collapse. But that wasn't the real problem. The real problem was the racism that we were facing in this city. Back in the 1960s, the federal government decided that we needed an interstate system, and they asked the Defense Department to build it. And what that meant is the Defense Department didn't think about cities, they thought about points of connection. And so they would route the interstates through the centers of cities. Well, if you think about what that means, you have to tear things down to put the road through. And where did they put them through? They put them through the people, the least valued communities within those cities. And so that amplified the problems we were having with racism. As a direct result of that, the infant mortality in Syracuse is the highest in the nation. It's 4 times worse for blacks than whites, but it's still the worst in the nation. It's a terrible challenge, and it's mirrored by rates of maternal mortality as well. So it's just a very difficult place to be in that regard. And there's other statistics, but there's good sides here too. We have an incredibly a set of diverse immigrant communities here. In the local high school where I work as a volunteer, there are over 70 different languages spoken. Now, that may or may not seem impressive for those of you in Europe, but I'll tell you, in this country, meaning if you're an American, that means you speak one language, like me. That's really pretty impressive. And we are a sanctuary city, so we are one of the cities that people come to when they're facing challenges with immigration. They can come here and be safe from intervention. I'm going to just show you a couple maps. This was the red line map that was drawn back before the interstate was born. The red spots were the only place that what they called then Negroes were allowed to live. And you can see that there were various neighborhoods assigned, Jewish, Italian, Polish, and so on. But if you look at that, you can pretty much, and that east-west gap was the Erie Canal. So that was where the canal went through, that joined east to west across the state. This is where they put the interstate, right through the heart of those areas where the only people who were allowed to live there were, frankly, the blacks and the Jews. And they all got displaced. What happened was the blacks were put on the west side of that north-south place, so they literally live under the interstate. And the Jews were moved to the east. Now it's been 60 years since this has been up. The highway is starting to collapse physically. And so one of the good things the government has done is said, well, rather than just rebuild it and tear down more buildings to make that happen, we'll route it around the outside of the city. And we will tear down this part of the interstate entirely and replace it with community space, parks, walkways, more friendly housing, that sort of thing, which is a wonderful thing, except that it means that all the people who live under the interstate right now have to be relocated again, because you can't live when this thing is coming down. And the federal government just took away all the money to help relocate them and find a new place for them to live. So we're back with the same scourge. But that's the environment in which I'm working to work with these communities to say, how do we tell stories of our strengths rather than all the problems that have been imposed on us? And I will tell you, as a white man from the suburbs, It's harder for me to gain entry to a lot of those communities, but I'm doing that. So kind of to wrap up, and then we'll take some questions. What I like to call this is we're moving from trauma to crucible. There's an old Lakota understanding that who we are the stories we tell, literally, the swarm of stories that we either listen to or tell others or that are told about us. But we literally create the world by the stories we tell and the stories we listen to. When we use words like victim for communities, we rob them of their strength and their resilience. That's not what we want to do. Trauma implies there's a victim. Crucible implies that there's some kind of transformation going on. Painful, but it's in the service of something better. So let's just return to that story for a moment. And what's the wisdom in this story? Well, for me, and this is a story I've used in a couple of different circumstances. Yes, the library was on fire, but it was shedding a new light. It was bringing the community together. There were benefits that came from it when the community was ready to work together. Does that mean we have to burn down our libraries to make these things happen? Absolutely not. But there is light that these difficult circumstances can shed if we make ourselves available to them. And that's really the challenge that we face as we try and bring storytelling productively to these communities. So with that, I'll turn it over to Marina, and we can have people in the chat offer questions and comments.
Thank you so much, Jim. And I saw in the chat that Dave would also like to say something about your presentation before
Sure.
before he starts his. And I think that this connection to the artistry and to the unlocking the creative potential of the community is really the way of transforming the sense of victimhood into some co-creative mode.
Yeah.
Dave, please, what you wanted to share?
Yeah, well, my short note was just to say that how I really relate to the approach that you've taken in Australia, and the story there of that city relates to my hometown Christchurch, which I will talk about shortly. The Tree of Life. Yeah, that's a drawing that a sketch that I've done. But you've placed all of the elements on there with the roots and the fruit and whatnot. And yeah, there's a bit of a story behind that. That's personal to myself. So yeah, no, that was just yeah.
Thank you.
I could relate to it on so many levels. I look forward to building up the relationship and moving
Yes.
forward.
Thank you. Yeah, I think for me, one of the keys in that exercise, it's anybody can really understand it, but you've gathered people together because they're facing a challenge, and the first thing you talk about is not how do we remember all the terrible things that happened. I mean, they'll be in the room, right? It's part of who we are. But to start to say, well, what do we want to keep? We don't want to keep the trauma. We want to keep the strengths and the resilience. And how do we maneuver from one to the other?
Yeah, exactly. And that's with a project I did many years ago called Owning Our Futures, working with a lot of little towns. It was the first thing we had to explain that we weren't the experts coming in to tell each of these communities what they were about.
Right.
And we managed to get 95% of the population, including the children, into community meetings to do their own tree of life type thing.
Yeah.
and that was really successful. What we were up against though was an elected council that decided that they were the ones elected to make the decisions and not the community. Whereas the CEO of that region could see that this was going to actually support them developing the regional plan by having the region write the plan together. So yeah, that's, I think what I'm going to talk about kind of relates to a lot of this stuff. So yeah, wonderful.
Violeta, please jump in.
Yeah, just a really quick reflection. I mean, I love this tree of life. I just want to say that it applies to any community. Like when I worked in companies where they were in red figures, they were about to go bust. All of a sudden, when you brought this kind of philosophy into a place, it they found a new foundation and they found new customer base. They found a new product mix. So it's not only for cities, communities, like schools, but it's also for any kind of organized entity that actually is searching for a new roots and a new foundation in order to move on together. Especially in the remote areas where they don't have many job opportunities, they have to rely on themselves. You know, they not cannot just go and change a job. So that kind of approach is really, really great also for bringing back the agility of into companies as well.
Mhm. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. And I also wanted to say thank you for this practice of giving a character to the problem, to the personification of the trauma. I think it correlates a lot with the psychotherapeutic work with shadow when you are starting
Yes.
talking with the shadow, with your trauma, with your pain, with the disease, when you can detach it from community, from some specific people, when you make it character and when you can express what you feel and at the same time acknowledge that it took place, it appeared, but you also can deal with it. You are not obliged in constantly fighting with this trait in people or in the community or in the place where it is embedded historically. And I think it's a very powerful practice.
Yes. And I'll just say two things quickly. I know we're running out of time, but one is what makes this even more powerful than normal shadow work is that you have an actual person personifying it. And there can be a dialogue. When a lot of the shadow work that we do normally is with an imagined something, but when you have an actual person, and that takes training, but that's okay. Making a few of these people available can be a real benefit. A lot of my work right now is under the category of what I call healing monsters. So I'm looking at stories where the monster, rather than being defeated, is being healed or transformed. And when that happens, we realize that that monster is actually helping us heal and maybe is a good companion to have despite their difficult origins. And so my Substack is Healing Monsters. So that's what I work on. Thank you all. Yeah.
Beautiful. And speaking about imaginary characters and monsters and living magic things, Dave, could you please share your real case about the restoration of the community after the earthquake in Christchurch town, and also your beautiful stories of stories for children in order to reconcile, in order to engage through children their parents and through parents the communities into the healing practice and work in New Zealand?
Yes, thank you, Tēnā koe. I will just share my screen and see if you can see that. It's is that what you can see?
No, you're not sharing.
The storytelling for as civic repair.
No, you're not sharing the screen. So
Oh.
could you maybe stop sharing and try again, maybe?
Yeah, I'll go back to right. You've got it now. Yep.
Yeah, can you make it maybe full
Yep.
screen? Yeah,
Okay.
perfect. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, this is the story of my hometown, Otutahi, Christchurch. Otutahi is the Māori name for Christchurch. Tuatahi was a Māori chief from there. And stories, this is really the start of the focus is really on what happened on the 22nd of February in 2011 with the Canterbury earthquake. We had two earthquakes. The initial earthquake was in my hometown, which was just out of Christchurch, Kaipoi. That was a 7.1 earthquake that was fortunately more rural and there were no deaths. But then after that, there was an aftershock of 6.3 that took 185 lives and damaged 130,000 homes, 30,000 of those seriously damaged, 10,000 of them completely destroyed. So the town was devastated. And the reason why a 6.3 earthquake caused so much damage was that it was pretty much right underneath the city. And it was a city that was built on land that was unstable, that the Ngaitahu, which were the local iwi, local tribe, advised the early surveyors that this was not a good place to build on. This was flood-prone swampland and not suitable. What happened in that earthquake was that the shaking caused the swamp to come up through the ground. And so this process of liquefaction happened. So not only did the buildings collapse, and it was a town that was known as our garden city. It was full of beautiful Gothic architecture. And of course, that stone architecture just collapsed. So the earthquake really ripped the soul out of the city. So what happened after that event? There were a couple of really good things. Is that the community came together, and a big part of that was the formation of the Student Volunteer Army. The university students formed this army of wheelbarrows and shovels and started going through the suburbs, just cleaning the whole place up. It changed people's opinion of students, which tend to be young people having a party and a good time and getting out of control and whatnot. But they set to work cleaning the town up, and then after they'd done that, the second part was to start replanting. So that was one of the good things. The in this image here, this visual shows just an area that was all housing that had to be cleared out, and it was you can still see the mud and the liquefaction coming up. So vast areas couldn't be rebuilt on. So many people were displaced. In the picture there is my favourite cousin Evan with the Governor General, and Evan was part of a group that fought for the residential people, particularly the ones that lived along the Avon River, whose houses were red zoned. In other words, they couldn't live in their houses again. They had to move out. So Evan had a vision to turn that red zone into a green zone and to have it replanted as a park that would go through the town. Um, and it's something that has now happened. Unfortunately, Evan passed away before it came into fruition. He had terminal cancer throughout this whole period. So, yeah, the good thing is that he's left this amazing legacy and started to put some of the life back into the city with his vision. Um, Now, at the time of the earthquake, I had been working with this chap here, um, Michael Cambridge. Michael Cambridge was a farmer from another region who had planted 1 million pine trees on his land. The Regional Development Agency asked if I could work with Michael to look at how he would add value to what he had planted. He'd been travelling from Aotearoa, New Zealand, to Austria and in Europe to look at what they did with pine. And together we developed a way of milling timber that was normally wasted into a material that could be used for housing, that would be healthy, that would alleviate the splitting of the wood, that was antibacterial. And we built this little test cabin, which we called the Snug, which was a little $3,000 solar cabin that maintained your body temperature because of the grooves of the timber and the camphor from the pine was healthy for your lungs. Because of the earthquake, we decided that we would gift Christchurch people these little cabins. So we filled that little black cabin up with food, and I got hold of the Mayor of Christchurch's wife, who was a friend of mine from my acting days, and she found a solo mother with a couple of children that couldn't sleep in their house at night time because of the damage that we would give this little cabin to. Just before we loaded the cabin up to take to Canterbury, we were told that we couldn't take it there anymore. There was a political problem going on. So that was the end of that. We took it there anyway, but we couldn't give it to the family. What then happened was that the council decided to have this competition and invited people to come up with the most innovative concepts to build a village in the centre of the town, which had been destroyed. The first prize was the land, which was a square called Latimer Square. They put it out to the world, to architects all around the world. There were over 1,000 entries that was submitted. And I decided, well, I'd been doing stuff around housing and different materials. So I assembled some Māori architects, Polynesian architects, eco-architects, permaculture specialists, and invited them to my place, which was a big house by the sea in a town called Whakatane. So we spent 2 weeks feeding all of this small group, the initial small group of 10 people, and walking on the beach. Before we started to think about the design of the building, we just thought about how people connect and meet and would walk along the beach talking about human connection, and then sprawled out great big reams of paper that we started to do some drawing on. And it was looking at a stick sticking out of the sand that gave us the idea for how we would go about building. This is the presentation boards that we provided for our entry. We got into, out of the 1,000 entries, we made it into the final 15. And this just shows the working that we put, because what we wanted to do was tell a story, because everybody that comes to this country from the initial Polynesian voyages and the Maori coming from Rarotonga to later the European voyages after Cook arrived here, all came on a journey from the sea. So we wanted to tell the story in designing an urban village in the center of the town of travelers coming together. We designed the buildings, which we call hinaki. A hinaki is a Maori, it's a fishing net for catching tuna, or tuna is the Maori name for eel. Um, and we looked at how we could make use of recycled materials, because there are a lot of materials, broken glass and things that were in the city, how we could use those materials, how we could recycle things, how we could use natural materials, precast hemp, cross-laminated timber, and we worked out how much energy we would consume to build the buildings and how much energy the buildings would produce using different technologies. So we introduced a lot of different ideas for the technologies. The chart for, I see if I can see my cursor on there. No. There is a diagram there that looks like the waterfall of all the energy going in and out. And we actually worked out that the building would generate more energy than it consumed. There were 3 of these hinaki, these apartment buildings that were shaped oval with hollow centers. In the center of the village was a whare tapiri. A whare tapiri is a Māori storytelling house. So it was a place for the community to be able to tell stories. It was a marketplace. Um, it had an arty in the front of it, which is a meeting area. There were raised gardens. There were gardens covering the buildings. Um, we considered everything that we could possibly think of, because this was meant to be about pure innovation. And as it was called Breathe, we 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 looked at it as inhaling, um, and diffusing, and then exhaling as a process. Um, we designed everything so that there was curves everywhere, because we wanted people to engage in close proximity rather than a lot of straight lines where people might avoid each other, avoid contact. So we looked at how we would make it uh, both a public space and a private space for people, because people would be living there, they'd be working there, and there was retail underneath the buildings as well. So this was basically the work that we did over just a period of 3 months, and presented it. And then what happened was that we were told our idea was very innovative. In fact, it was too innovative. And buildings are not meant to be round, they're meant to be square. And so we would not be shown to the final judge. One of the local architects from the iwi, the tribal group, said that the real problem was it was too Polynesian for an English city. So that annoyed us somewhat, because we had because of our design, attracted some stunning engineers from different parts of the world, senior people from IKEA, industrial designers, engineers from the UK. There are a lot of people that were interested because this would be the first building to exceed the living building standard in New Zealand and the building biology and ecology standards, which are very strict standards for how buildings would be conceived. And it would be the first truly Polynesian building in a modern city. So that all kind of frustrated me to the point where I decided I would do something for children um, uh, because they're the ones that were going to be owning the future. And it was obvious that the bureaucracy was still stuck in their concrete way of thinking. And it kind of, when I was putting this together, I thought of something that Ian McGilchrist said. Attention is not passive. How we attend determines what becomes available to us as a world. And I didn't want, thinking about future generations, and my children, I've got 5 with 6 grandchildren. I knew that we were going to be facing, they were going to be facing things in the future, some challenges that we're just growing, deeper with climate change and geopolitics and whatnot. I didn't want them to be trapped um, like possums in the headlights. It's a saying that we have here. Um, they need to feel empowered and something is possible. And particularly looking at this, quote from Aristotle: "Give me a child until he is 5, and I'll show you the man." Those first few years really shape children. So I decided, in my frustration, to write a story, and so I wrote a Dr. Seuss style story called Wobbly Town. Funny enough, about a town that was controlled by a very short mayor who liked to build buildings that were, each building was taller than the last one. And the town slowly went into deep shadow as the tall buildings cut out the light, and to the point where the children end up leaving the city and going out to the country. And I'll after the slide, I'll dive into some of the parts of that story. That story sort of generated into, I just got into a flow of writing, and it became part of a series of 5 stories. And I realized that stories can be full of metaphors that can be a gentle way of expressing things that can be challenging but hopeful when you approach them with the right attitude. The stories also can be a place where you can start to separate the creativity and the purely fictional, and stimulate conversations around science and exploration of learning. In my work that I'd done prior to this around location-based storytelling, there was that side of it as well. And as I looked at storytelling and some of the authors that I'd illustrated storybooks for and whatnot, that it was frustrating, and that so few of them were actually getting recognition and reward for their work. And I realized through conversations that I needed to do more than just write a story that might have some impact. I needed to create a space that was pro-social for storytelling that would actually engage children in an environment that took them from passively consuming to actively engaging and exploring, following their curiosity. So the easiest way of doing something that was inclusive and free to access was to build this Imaginarium, which is the picture on the left, a digital space with that could be filled with pro-social stories. That my stories were just samples of what could be possible for other people to play stories, and so the whole architecture of it could be gamified and engaging for children, so they could start to explore a story, stories within stories within stories. So we just flick through to the next slide. Yep, come on. Actually, here I will just bring this over. This is Wobbly Town. So this is just to give you an example of a story. I set this so that it was in no particular period of time. It could be anywhere. Dedicated it to my cousin. That's a portrait I did of him with his award that he got from the Governor General. And I wrote the story because I'd worked on another story in Dr. Zeus, sort of a fun patter. So from way up in the great tall towers, you will not see trees, you will not see flowers. However, to the ground, if you peer, you can make out the children in Wobbly Town Square. And squarely in the middle of that squarely squared square, you will find the one tree squarely in there. So this is kind of the way I started writing the story. So it was very sort of Dr. Zeusy. And then in the story, the way it fills out is then along come the mayor and his big yellow digger. We must remove this last tree to make our town bigger. And so it was where once grew a tree, grew a new car park building where the parking is free. And so the story sort of follows along that pattern. I won't, for time's sake, I won't dwell too much. The children leave the town, they shed a tear, and then as their teardrops of water drip to the ground, something happens, something profound. And this is the guts of the story, is that one teardrop causes a little plant to grow, and they start to notice the things in the ground around them, the ants and the snails and the birds, and they have this inspiration. Let's go out into the forest and let's do what the animals do and build like they do, build their homes like birds' nest houses and snail shell cars and geodomes like beehives, and on it goes. So it's all this fun, proactive stuff meant to encourage kids to sort of think biomimically. And then we get to the period where building everything tall and everything straight was not so good, was not so great. When the ground starts to wiggle and wobble around, so did the things attached to the ground. You see, when buildings are built way too tall, a rather large wobble can make some things fall. And so the adults run around, they don't know what to do. They get a text from the kids to come out to the forest. So the people poured out of town like a pot pouring tea to a wondrous sight. What could it be? And the adults discover in the forest this town. And whenever I read my stories to my children or I made stories up, it was always just an excuse to have a conversation about something. And so throughout the story, there's all of these points where there's metaphors for different things to explore, to dig in. And this one of those themes here is about the adults finding their childhood and forgetting that there was this natural place that they used to go to and play in and do things. They'd been urbanized and gone away from the natural environment, which the children discovered and rebuilt. And so basically this story sort of gets to the point where the adults end up working for the children and reinventing themselves. And what used to be work is now more like play, and they end up replanting the tree, and on it goes. And then it goes on to the following stories. Anyway, that's that bit there. Um, excuse me. I'll just finish with this slide. So, because I've touched on this before in an earlier talk, what I said about doing and what I'm doing now is building an architecture for storytelling, because what we are faced with now is that more and more, particularly in the States, is that big platforms are taking over what we consume. Disney has been bought by this and CNN's been bought by that. It's all been, there's half a dozen organizations that now own most of the media in the world. And it's a real challenge because it's taking away, I want to take, you know, I see my grandchildren becoming passive consumers. And the way I'm crafting the architecture is that they become the storytellers. There is a place that is safe for them to craft a story, to be involved in a story, to explore other stories, and to share stories with children from other places. I've got a dozen stories, and they also go across different species, because this is something I got from Robbie Stamp talking about Douglas Adams and the Hitchhiker's Guide, was to see the world through multi-species lenses. So I could go on about this for some time, but I'll end it here. It is about refining our head, heart, and our hands, how we feel, how we think, and what we do, and feeding back that to the child, to the family, to the community. So it's very much about community storytelling and envisioning what our futures could look like. So yeah. Anyway, I'll stop my sharing if I can find the right button. Oh,
Okay.
can you stop it?
And you didn't stop sharing. You just closed your presentation.
Oh, right. Yeah, I've
Thank
lost
you.
my button.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. And
Marina, can you
uh,
stop sharing for me?
Violeta, maybe you can.
Press the stop sharing at the bottom. I cannot even now, even though okay, no. Hmm.
In the
A
bottom
second.
of your
Aha, okay. I see it. Yeah, that's fine.
You got it?
No, the bottom you have stop sharing at the bottom of your screen. Unfortunately, I cannot take control over your.
No, unfortunately, it's sorry.
Just close and come back.
Yeah.
So while we are managing the screen, I wanted to ask if there are some ideas and questions and thoughts around what Dave have shared and before Dave, Jim and Violeta. So maybe you would like to add something, and after that, maybe Omar could also join us and share some thoughts. We have another 10 to 12 minutes, so I think that it would be great to maybe share some ideas and feedback and finalize our question with maybe some takeaways of what might be the most important to be shared. Jim?
Well, I think one thing is, just in the very different ways we each shared stories, how important it is that communities really do bond around stories, and that being intentional about the kinds of stories we tell. If they're a difficult history that hasn't been told, then that has to, these are all stories. The difference is between the stories that we tell with an intention to improve things and stories like the we heard from Australia that are gossip or rumor mongering, and being just very intentional about the kinds of stories we tell. Dave's stories about a different future. All is, I think that's one of the common threads.
Yeah, I also was thinking that we started from this discerning of storytelling and manipulating of social opinion. And it seems that storytelling is such a powerful tool that might be used both for the harm, for the sake of some political ideas, and at the same time, it's a powerful healing tool which can create the understanding of what else is possible. And after that, you can create a story which will change the worldview of people. And in a given time, they will believe that new futures, new possibilities, new identity, new way of life is possible through this providing of the new vision. And we definitely need to be, first of all, aware and careful and respectful to the story as a tool of what we are narrating, what we are bringing to the community. And at the same time, it's such a beautiful opportunity to bring peace and to bring reconciliation and shared vision of a beautiful future for the community. Violeta, your thoughts?
Well, I'm still trying to reconcile. It was a very powerful discussion today, very down to earth as well. But with the last story, I also learned that when we craft a story, it's not necessary that will be always welcomed. So it's also the framework within which we place the story probably needs a long preparation. And I've been in situations like Dave described many times when you were ahead of time and all of a sudden the community, a broader community, is just not with you. It's not on the same level of awareness or understanding of the challenges or even seeing the future the way you see it. So what Dave did and moved to a storytelling for kids and creating this vision of this naturally sort of calibrated communities with the natural environment maybe place positive seeds in kids that will read these stories, and tomorrow they will be the ones who will support projects like that and projects that he was aiming at the beginning. So I think that is really worth bringing into our awareness. I'm sure we all have stories like that, and then we ask ourselves why. It's just it's equal responsibility of building the broader awareness as following your dreams. And I'm learning that all the time, and I'm seeing it with my own ideas. It's just often they are way ahead of time, and I don't have patience to build the supporting communities. But the older I get, more patient I am, and slower I manifest my ideas, and making sure that they can land and get rooted into something. So that's very powerful. And as I would just compliment to what you said, Marina, before about the Jim's story of the shadow playing the roles also in the communities. We know about this technique from a business world, but it's equally important that those ghosts get faces and articulation, and people can directly relate to them. That's beautiful, and I haven't seen it being used in a community, so it's something to seriously consider and incorporate. So, thank you a lot. And while listening to this other two stories, I could relate to what Suada and I were sharing, because nobody had made any kind of attempts to take the ghosts away from Balkan region. And although those ghosts are still there, there is a lot of reconciliation going on within particular communities, but not on a regional level. On a regional level, nobody has addressed them. And these political ghosts are still around, and the stories still get repeated instead of learning and building a different future based on those experiences. So, yeah, really, really deep and important messages, which I hope we continue to share. We will share all of these stories within social media now as video clips and sharper messages. So I'm inviting you then to repost them and use them wherever you want. They're your stories, they will be your clips. And that's how we can bring this to awareness. I mean, people simply, if they're not aware, they cannot change anything. That's one of the rules. So I hope this will add a little drop into better understanding and give storytelling even a bigger chance to create the future we want to live.
Yeah, I kind of got to the point where I could see what motivates me is my children and my grandchildren, and so they influence my thinking, and so to then focus on working with them and using humor and fun and stuff that they could relate to is a good way to influence the adult rather than trying to influence the adult directly when thinking is very stuck, and that's where the metaphors come in. And I think I've had the privilege of talking to our friend Robbie Stamp a lot over the last few years around his work and the Hitchhiker's Guide and the next iteration of it, and realizing how powerful satire can be to take some of the heat out of things that can be quite confrontational when you take things very seriously all the time. We can laugh at ourselves and be a little bit more, a bit more humility, and then with that humility, free up our thinking. So yeah, all of these. This is just another wonderful opportunity to learn a little bit more. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for this deep conversation, and I hope that we will continue this discussion because it seems so powerful and so important. And when we are talking about the soul of the place, it is inseparable from the notion of the healing of the soul, the healing of the soul and soil on which we live. and from which we feed not only physically but also spiritually. And it was such a powerful conversation, and thank you so much for this deep conversation, sincerity, openness, and we will continue collecting these stories. And we also discussed that we will aim to create a book which will be specifically focused on the reconciliation and trauma healing, geotrauma and territorial trauma healing. And again, it's so important to acknowledge and to heal and to nurture the trauma, the wound, the past, but at the same time to look at the future, to smile some ways possible, to laugh at ourselves, and to co-create new stories which are full of joy and happiness and hope, instead of pain and maybe some blaming. So yeah, we are the weavers of the future of our children. Thank you.
And
Well, and you know, the Haudenosaunee, the Onondaga, have a value that says you always consider the impact to the seventh generation, and that's an important perspective.
And that's a great ending. That's sharp, 17:00 Central European Time.
Yes.
And let me stop recording.
Yeah, deep gratitude to all of
Yes.
you.
Thank you very much. Really, it was very, very inspiring and listening.